Hello, how are you today? I hope you're doing well. We're going to talk a little bit more about your lunch. This is the video where I said I'm going to go over a few things I've already gone over, make a few connections, a couple different things, but this is just kind of extra if you feel the need, and I hope you'll watch. And there's one other little video on here that I really wanted to tell you before to watch. So when I get to that, I'll emphasize that. Got a new good hat on for you today. There's plenty more where that came from. We're going to talk about your lunch again. Hope you had a good lunch. I had a clock for lunch today. A clock. Couldn't finish, though it was too time consuming. So now that we've got that out of the way, now let's get to this. We're going to look at, again, producers, consumers, decomposers. So if we look at your basic food web that we looked at the other day, and by the way, your food webs were good. There's still going to be a prize winner. I'm still waiting to hear from some of you, but good job. This is not too difficult of stuff. Okay, a lot of you seem to be eating deer out there, unless you're using your imagination. But here you have again a kind of a food web, and in your food web, unlike what that objective on the last slide said, you don't commonly have decomposers in your food web, right? So we'll get back to that a little bit, but we already talked about that. Here we'll also emphasize on this in the next slide that this is all human beings' attempts to describe something that's really pretty complex and to give names to things which, are a little bit subjective in a sense that, excuse me, if we tell this story, these producers get eaten by these guys, then that identifies these guys as primary consumers. But if we tell the story of these producers getting eaten by these guys, and then these guys getting eaten by those same little shrimp-like krill, that identifies the krill as a secondary consumer. Guess what? The krill don't care what we humans call them, right? They eat what they eat, they do what they do. But you see that at the same point in time, a certain particular thing is often primary, secondary, tertiary consumer, depending on the little food chain that it is currently involved in. Why is this like a big Jenga game? We didn't talk about this before, but this is one of the key things I want you to take away from this ecology unit. All of these little things, and notice some of them are specific, like a sperm whale is a specific species, whereas fish is a much more general category, as are all these plankton. There's lots of different kinds, okay? But why should we be worried about one kind of particular living thing, right? Like we commonly see, we're worried about this particular lizard becoming extinct or whatever. Why is that? Well, again, they're all like Jenga pieces. And if you take out a Jenga piece, well, it might make a huge difference. It might make virtually no difference, right? But something's going to come of it. If we take these things out, right, then things that eat them are going to have less food. Things that were eaten by them are going to be able to reproduce more. But if you have lots of parts, this is the key Jenga idea. If you have lots of parts in this, the removal of one is not likely to make that whole thing crash. Stability is what we're talking about here. And now we're talking about the diversity of an ecosystem in how many different species it has in it. The more diverse, the better. The more pieces in the Jenga game, the less likely it is that one piece gets taken out, causes the whole thing to crash. Okay, so we'll come back to that in just a second. But now we'll look at this real fast. So here you have your decomposers like we talked about before. And here you have not just energy being passed from one kind of thing to another, but you also have now stuff being passed back to the producers. We talked about that in the other video, the difference between energy flowing through an ecosystem, whereas matter gets recycled. We talked about that on a couple other videos. So now, if we compare these side by side, we see some things that make them easy, not too hard to confuse, because the similarities of different things make for confusion. So again, if we have these things in the primary consumer box and these things in the primary consumer box, we see that this one box again represents what might be several things in a food web. Right? And if we go to secondary consumers, these things are in that box, these things are in that box, these things are in that box. So this is almost a cut down version of this in a sense, right? And often again, you have decomposers in this trophic level diagram that you don't have in a food web for no great reason. You could put them in a food web. So here's the idea about the Jenga game as well. If you take the top piece off a Jenga game, it's not going to collapse. The top piece doesn't support things in a Jenga game. But in this kind of thing, it does. If you take what are often the top predators, right? This is not a game that depends on gravity like Jenga, right? This time, if you take the top one off, this could cause huge kind of problems, and that's why we called those top ones often keystone predators. This is the link that I'd like you to click on, and if it's not hot link and it doesn't work, then just Google up wolves in Yellowstone ecology, and you'll get this video that's really neat that shows you when the wolves were all killed in Yellowstone, what happened, and then when they were returned to Yellowstone, some 70 years later, the changes were astonishing, all for the good, right? And so it's a great, great story. It's one of the classic stories in ecology, and be neat. It's only a few minutes. If you watch it, I think you'll be quite entertained and enlightened. So now here we're going to compare these two diagrams, and I already did this before a little bit. Here's the one that tells you as you go up each level, the available energy decreases by about 90%, right? What's left of these plants, if they have to go through grasshoppers and mice to get to this snake, well, only about 1% is left because 10% gets left here, 1% gets left here, and that's what the snake can feed on, is that 1% of what started out as plants. This is what tells you big lesson number 2. If you want to feed 8 billion people on the earth, the most efficient way is to eat plants. This again, we said, toxic kind of things like DDT, if they fall into two categories. One is non-biodegradable. They're not broken down easily, so they can be excreted. And number 2 is not water soluble, but fat soluble, so they don't get dissolved easily and urinated out. They can pile up. Energy decreases, but these things pile up. And again, in this diagram, when they framed this with a pyramid kind of thing, they made it a little confusing because the numbers, as you see, increase as you go up the food chain, whereas the amount of energy decreased. So this is the lesson to watch what you put in the environment, because if it fits certain categories, it can come back to bite you, and this is the lesson we learned first with this pesticide called DDT. So I hope that was enlightening, maybe helpful. And that's really all of this first unit as far as my instruction to my PowerPoints. I'll await for your feedback. I might venture into one of those conferences on Schoology as we go. I'll let you know about that. But this is day 3. We've got quite a few days to go. As you know now, we're here for the whole month of April. And we're going to make the best of it. You make the best of it. Have fun, learn something. And this stuff we're learning here helps make you a good citizen. So pay attention to become a good citizen, because you really want to become that. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Again, always feel free to message me with any questions. If I get like 50 of the same questions, I'll address the answer all, kind of collectively in another update. But if it's a specific one, like I already have, I'll message you back, and hopefully we'll all stay on the same page. Be safe.